right, so Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very complex game, and at its core, your main objective is to somehow stop the opponent, overwhelm them, destroy their defenses, take away their resources, and sometimes to completely prevent them from playing. And that's where floodgates come in. It's an unofficial term for a card with a continuous effect that restricts one or both players from performing some type of action. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about some different types of floodgates, how to deal with them, why do they exist in the first place, and ultimately decide whether or not we should just hit an erase button on all of them and let the game be reborn again. Let me know your thoughts. I would love for this to just be a discussion between you guys and me. I will of course be sharing only my opinions in this video, but share your thoughts please and like the video if you enjoy it as well. So we are going to be getting started with why the floodgates exist and what are they good for, if anything. So like I mentioned, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an extremely complex game. There is a lot of moving parts, and inherently the game is just very broken. It's always been this way, but of course power creep is also a thing, and it's becoming worse and worse in recent years, I feel like. And when you have insane archetypes and effects and abilities and just everything that a deck is able to do, especially on turn 1, sometimes even on turn 0, you kind of need that counterweight. You need a way to balance things out, and that is where floodgates come in. You want to stop your opponent from playing, because if you don't, they're going to overwhelm you by default. And sometimes floodgates could be seen as a necessary evil. And then there's some decks like, for example, Draco is a great example. But a more recent example, one we're actually experiencing right now, and it is the reality we are living in, it's stun decks. And I just cringe every time I use this word or think about stun decks, period. And I feel like that's the way a lot of the community reacts, and that's kind of the point of this video. We just don't like floodgates inherently, because stopping you from playing is kind of the opposite of what this game is supposed to be in theory. So of course it's not something we are down for, but also we have to admit to ourselves that we have been utilizing floodgates more likely than not, at least a couple times in our Yu-Gi-Oh! Life, or however you want to call it. If you're playing Branded right now, you're playing Gimmick Puppet. If you're playing a deck that can utilize Rivalry and it is a 1, you're probably citing that 1 copy, perhaps even main decking it, and you're not feeling that bad about yourself because you know that when you open it, you are more than likely winning. And that's the issue with floodgates. To stop your opponent from playing is pretty much just, it's the better have the out type of mentality and way of playing. And a lot of people have an issue with that. And I think this is a great segue into another thing I want to talk about, is the different types of floodgates actually. And with it, there's also going to be different types of removal associated, because even though floodgates are terrible and they are the bane of our existence, there are still outs to those floodgates. And then here's the people that say you better have the out, you kind of have to play it. And then we're back to that entire Mystic Mind discussion with, I don't even want to get into that, honestly. So let's talk about different types of floodgates. Obviously, we have established that this is a type of card that continuously is preventing you from playing. We obviously have continuous trap cards, which are like the most notable floodgates probably. And then there's also spell cards like Dimensional Fissure, for example, is a really annoying one that Flunder utilizes right now. And then there are also some monsters like Vanity's Fiend or Fossodyna, Majesty's Fiend as well. There's quite a lot of them actually. And we have established that there are ways of dealing with those floodgates. But does the existence of outs justify the existence of floodgates as a whole? And if we were to ban all floodgates, how far should we go? Because we have just said that there's literally monsters, spells, and also traps out there that function as floodgates. So are we supposed to ban an insane amount of cards? Where do we stop? I would love to know your thoughts. Again, I'm just throwing things out there. In my opinion, floodgates are an issue, obviously. But like we talked about, it depends on the type of outs that you are able to have. So let's get into that. You have to have some kind of removal. But let me ask you this. Should we really be forced to utilize all this back removal and quote-unquote waste very important side deck slots because we might get floodgated? And also, if our opponent draws that Floodgate, it's not guaranteed that we're also drawing our back row removal. It actually matters. Even though the outs exist, it's not always going to be the case of you just having that Cosmic when they flip a rivalry. It's not realistic. So are we supposed to be okay with all of these Floodgates, or most of them, still existing that can just prevent us from playing at any given point in time? I don't know. You know, I think it's actually a problem, because you're trying to play this game, you're trying to actively play the game, and you are supposed to utilize your side deck slots to combat decks in the meta as a whole, you know, not just the Floodgates that they are utilizing. On the other hand, something like Cosmic Cyclone or even Twin Twisters, Lightning Storm as well, these are just generic cards that you can utilize against many different decks, so I guess it's fine because there's also coverage there. But then we get to monsters, for example, and when you're staring down a Vanities or something like that, you're kind of preying on top decking that imperm that you need to try and play through the turn. But a lot of times these kinds of monsters, they're going to be backed up by everything, because decks that utilize monsters like that usually are just playing, you know, the protect the castle type of strategy, where everything in the back row, everything they are doing is focused on preserving that Floodgate, which in my opinion is inherently unhealthy, because at that point you are not utilizing Floodgates to actually function as a Floodgate to stop something from becoming too overwhelming or too powerful, but you're building an entire strategy around that, and that's where I think we have to draw the line. You could also turn around and say that the second Floodgates are present in the meta and stun decks are present as well. There is an inherent issue with the format, which people have argued that when it comes to the tier 0 format, because what's really stopping Snake Eye? Just other Snake Eye decks pretty much. And then people started to play, you know, stun decks, and immediately the win rate of those decks went up because it's just a little easier to deal with the best deck in the meta. And I understand that when it's a consequence of something that's happening in the format, but overall I just think it's a problem that decks can outright completely stop you from playing. But we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty of that. Let's think about decks that, for example, don't really have it. You know, there's just decks that they're okay, but they need a little extra something to push them over the edge, and those decks sometimes utilize Floodgates because it's just that extra piece of pressure that they are able to put up that actually makes it so that deck can compete in the meta. And I want to ask you, are Floodgates okay to exist in that scenario? So decks that just aren't really it can still try and do well? But let's talk about something else. We talked about, you know, outs, obviously. How about cards that don't really have a lot of outs? Because when it comes to some monsters, you have to try and deal with them in a very specific way, and I'm mainly looking at Gimmick Puppet Nightmare right now, because there's been a lot of talk about that card, and honestly, Branded does not need a specific, like, help, pretty much. In my opinion, I think the deck is extremely strong with everything that it has going for it, and at that point they do not need that extra something we just discussed. So in that case, paired up with the fact that it is really tough to deal with Gimmick Puppet Nightmare just because of its effect pretty much, I think in that case it would be okay to ban a card that prevents you from playing. But what about Flunder? There's Harpy's Featherstorm, which is a really annoying card, and I guess with that we're gonna talk about lingering effects, because that's also a type of Floodgate, but it is not on the board. It is not staying there and chilling for you to draw a Cosmic and deal with it. So what do you think about those effects? Is Flunder a deck that needs a little help? Yeah, sometimes. But should they have an effect that you cannot physically interact with, and then they pretty much win off the back of it for the most part? I think that's also an interesting question, because we did have an out, and I guess let's talk about that. Red Reboot. Now, I could make a separate video on that probably. Let me know what your take is when it comes to Red Reboot and it being banned, because that is pretty much the counterweight to traps, to Floodgates, to extremely strong cards that prevent you from playing. But then that Red Reboot also prevents the opponent from playing almost completely if they dedicate their strategy to trap cards. So I understand why Reboot is banned. It is just sad that it was a really good way to deal with Floodgates specifically. So I guess that's it. That's my little take on Reboot. I'm fine with it being banned, but it's just a little sad sometimes when you could just utilize that, pay half your life, deal with a Floodgate and be done with it. But yeah, when it comes to outing lingering effects, I think you have all been waiting for this moment in the video, probably Shifter. Also Joel and Logbert. I would love for us to have this discussion, and we have talked about this on the channel, and you had really good takes when it comes to both Shifter and Draw, because people draw a lot of comparisons between those cards, and they also say that if Shifter is banned, Draw should be banned as well. They are both lingering. They prevent whole turns, and with Shifter it also lasts for 2 turns, which is extremely broken. I think it's a problem when you have a lingering Floodgate type of effect with pretty much no out to it, because the thing that exists is called by, and when your opponent goes first and they drop that Shifter, your call by is not doing anything. And what they also did is they limited Gamma, which is just, you know. So yes, but again, Shifter is the type of card that is pushing decks over the edge. You look at Vanquish Soul, Exosister, Centurion, for example, and also random decks that sometimes utilize Shifter, like Sprite or something. But overall, you have really strong decks when it comes to Kashtira and Flunder specifically that utilize Shifter, on top of them being inherently quite broken as a deck themselves. So then it's the case of Gimmick Puppet again. Do you need that extremely broken card if your deck is okay to begin with? And now let's talk about the actual hits on the ban list and the actual, I guess, existence of Floodgate right now. Summon Limit is newly banned. And there's also Imperial Order, which we were all just so happy when this got banned. But then if we scroll further down to the limited section, on the same ban list, when they banned Summon Limit, they also limited Anti-Spell. A ban list before that, they limited Goza Match, There Can Be Only One, and Rivalry as well. I understand why Summon Limit was banned. You know, Snake Eye was just so broken with it. It is literally just, I can't even. Why is it okay for the other Floodgate to be at 1? Because at that point, what they become is a Sacky one-of, and we do not like Sacky one-ofs. I think this is a huge problem, and there's a lot of cards that like that. People like to say either it's at 0 or at 3, because at 3 you at least do not get pissed off when they draw it. But just try and explain to me why it is okay for some other Floodgates to be at 1. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, because the entire, I guess, distribution of hits when it comes to cards that pretty much do a very similar thing is so random, and also so focused on, you know, their gains and the product they want to push. And right now I'm mainly focusing on, you know, the hits that we saw when it comes to Baron and Savage, and Appaloosa was not banned when it's pretty much doing a very similar thing, but conveniently it also has a reprint in Rarity Collection. So of course they're not gonna hit it, but that's exactly what I am saying. Why are some Floodgates hit and others are not? So do I think all Floodgates have to be banned? Probably not. If we consider all of the Floodgates in existence, like we talked about, for example, Majesty's Fiend, you have to think about decks that actually abuse those cards. That's pretty much why Summon Limit was banned, like we talked about before. But I also think that some Floodgates are very similar. They function in a similar way. They're also, you know, the same card type for the most part, just like all the trap cards we just discussed, or like Draw and Shifter. And I do think they should be making a much better selection when it comes to hitting cards that completely prevent people from playing. So in my opinion, I think they have got to be a little more strict when it comes to hits, but definitely do not ban every single Floodgate, because in reality, you know, sometimes decks do need it, and they are part of the game at the end of the day, so that's also something to consider. But I don't know, hopefully this was a fun video and I brought up some points that we can discuss, and you can share your thoughts in the comments. If you're still sticking around, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!